How much milk are we getting now?
Well, I don't know how large this one container is. I'm gonna guess it's, I don't know. But that one is almost full. For all practical purposes full. Generally we're getting, let's see, yesterday I got 1 gallon and a half and about 2 cups for one milking.
So 3 gallons of milk.
Yeah.
A day from the 2 textures.
Yeah, they're doing well.
Welcome back. You know, there's a reason that animal foods were very important in more northern climates. It's because when you can't grow plants, often you can still have animal food like milk and meat. Maybe not eggs so much because a lot of your fowl quit laying in the winter, but you had something to eat. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about having food through the winter, both from animals and from vegetables. We planted these beds of greens at the end of summer, coming into fall, when we were in drought conditions. You can see the greens look pretty rough right now because they're all covered in frost, but they're not dead. They'll be fine, at least until we there's an upcoming night that's supposed to get down to 16. We'll see how that turns out. But generally these brassicas are cold hardy down into the 20s, sometimes even the low 20s, and if it gets below that, we cover them with sheets from the thrift store. So this is good if you're in North Florida or Lower Alabama, up into Central Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. If you're in the South and the temperatures don't normally get below the 20s, you can often have fresh greens, daikon radishes, cabbages, turnips, that sort of thing, through the winter or through most of the winter, depending on if you get one of those nasty colds or not. I think the conclusion that people often jump to is that in order to have food through the winter, you have to have something like this behind me, because, you know, it gets too cold. Where you're going to have food, you don't have any food, you have to have a greenhouse. And then, you know, if you live further north, you have to have heaters in your greenhouse and double walls and all kinds of other stuff. You know, maybe you've got to dig a giant pit and build a greenhouse in it in order to have food through the winter. But what did people do before there were greenhouses? That's really the question, because that's going to be your more anti-fragile, minimalist solution. What did people do before greenhouses? You know, what did people do before they had pressure-treated lumber and they could make raised beds? Well, they made mounded beds like this. They just planted right in the ground with what they had, or they did single row gardens, you know, and they had a mule plow it up for them. But I think if you get to the simplicity of it, what you need to do is grow in the growing season, the plants that like that season, and then store them up for winter, right? That sounds simple. So what do? You get a big dehydrator. Now you'd probably use a solar dehydrator, in that you'd lay stuff on top of your roof and dry it out, or you would spread it out in the sun if you were going to do that. Canning? Well, canning's been around for a few hundred years, but not in the level that we have it today until about the last 100 years. Canning, maybe. Probably you would have a root cellar instead, and you would store a lot in a root cellar, or you would store roots in the ground and then just spread a bunch of straw or dirt even over the top of it to keep them from freezing solid and being destroyed. I like simpler is better, and as a matter of fact, when things start to get out of season, I don't usually try to grow them anymore. Like tomatoes, I'm not trying to grow tomatoes right now. I'm only sticking to the onions and the brassicas that can take the cold, so we have those greens coming in. And we're also eating a lot of what we stored up over the summer. So we have boxes of roots sitting on the porch right now, covered, closed-in porch. And I've got other pots full of yams and things like that I have covered with straw, and I have set aside indoors to keep them fresh all the way through the winter. So we have something to eat. And that combined with the animal food of having the cows that we can milk, we have stored up hay, and they eat the hay now that the grass has frozen, and they produce milk, so we can have a high quality food through the winter, along with our stored roots, which are much higher calories than what we can grow in the garden right now. And then we have pickled daikons that we're eating regularly. Having pickles, live fermented pickles, means that they keep for a really long time. They can sit in a jar on the counter, and the natural lactic acid that's in there is keeping them preserved, and of course they're very good for your stomach as well. So we've got our bacon from our pigs that we harvested, and we've got the fresh milk, and we've got the pickles, and then we've got the roots, and then we have the small amount of greens that can actually grow in the garden at this time of year. So last night we had a smoked pork roast, and we had some rice that we bought. Can't grow rice here so far as I know, or I don't want to bother because it's too much effort. And then we had some greens from the garden. We had pak choy and mustard that I steamed, and then I put a little bit of sesame oil and apple cider vinegar on them with some salt, and that was really delicious as a side. We could have just bypassed the rice altogether, but the kids like it. So, you know, the key, I think, to growing and having your food in the winter is learning what grows in season, how to store what grows in season, and to know which things can stay in your gardens either under mulch or actually able to tolerate the cold of winter through the winter season. And the further north you go, the more you often have to rely on preservation and possibly on animal foods or even on hunting to get you through a winter without a lot of technological solutions like this back here, which is way overkill. I wouldn't have that unless I had a plant nursery. So having a plant nursery to be able to keep propagative materials alive is really important. And if I was just gardening, I would probably have a small greenhouse, maybe a 10 by 20 or something like that, so I could start a bunch of transplants early in the year. It's nice to have that kind of season extension, but I don't like to rely on it a lot either. Like, for example, the other night we had winds that were just ridiculous, and some of that stuff gets blown all over the place, and it's just not really that viable. I don't want to deal with it here. And as you can see in the grocery row gardens right now, there's not a lot going on. We have green onions that are still here. We have frozen cannas. The loquat can handle this weather. Got frozen stevia. Got more green onions, they don't mind it. There's a sleeping mulberry. There's some very burned Musa Basju bananas. There's a sleeping chestnut. There's not really a lot to see, and you can see there's frost all over everything. And we had such drought this year. Normally I would have all kinds of brassicas planted all through here. You know, all of this mulched area would have something growing on it. But it was so dry and the ground was so hard earlier in the year, all I did was put in those 2 beds of brassicas and keep them going by running the hose on them, since we don't have a well out here yet. And I didn't want to try and irrigate this entire area and then have to plant it. And fortunately, we had planted enough stuff earlier in the year that when we were harvesting out all of the sweet potatoes and everything, we had tons of sweet potatoes. We're still eating sweet potatoes. We had tons of pumpkins. We're still eating pumpkins. And not having this in production didn't hurt us. But we do still have grocery stores right down the road. You know, we would have to figure out a solution, a well or carrying water or something like that, if we really needed to produce all of our food from this area. And, you know, last year we had over 2,500 pounds of food from the vegetable gardens. That was mostly right here, and then the little gardens behind me. And that's good, but it might not be enough. You've got to feed your chickens as well, and feed the cows, and this drought of this last summer would have been a really bad deal. It's not much to see, folks. I think I'll just do a long, slow fade out on this grocery row. Think about growing the stuff that's in season. When it's in season, learning how to preserve it, sticking with that before jumping to complicated technological solutions and lots of plastic. I'm not a big fan of plastic in general. Keep getting stuck using it though. Long, slow. Fade out. May your thumbs always be green.